Russian spies are the very best, which is why I used to love working against them when I was a deep cover MI5 officer and surveillance expert. They truly understood how to operate on foreign soil as, under the guise of being diplomats, they operated out of the Russian embassy in Kensington Palace Gardens. They would hardly ever try to recruit members of the British Parliament because they knew the risks of being caught were incredibly high. Most of the time they were here to advance their country's technical or military progress by targeting our defense companies and tech firms. I grudgingly admired them, because despite them trying to undermine this country, they would do it in a way that was subtle. Stealing secrets with a feather, that's how the Russians generally did it. No sledgehammers involved, unless it was a reprisal on one of their own defecting agents, as we now know only too well with the nerve gas attack on double agent Sergei Skripal. Back in 2012, I'd been on this particular job for weeks, one of a team keeping surveillance on the Russian, codenamed Dirty Boot, every time his S-Class Mercedes with diplomatic plates left the embassy. Then our main attention switched to his new contact, a tall, blonde-haired woman in her early 20s he'd recruited and was priming to spy for him. She was a receptionist at an office of executive suites at Farnborough in Hampshire, just a stone's throw from the premises of a top-secret tech company that specialized in satellite imagery. She was vulnerable and was tempted. She'd left university with massive debts and had tried to supplement her income by taking on dodgy escort work. He drew her into his clutches by offering her a way out. He also promised her a new identity, a paid-for home and a job with the ministry in Moscow if she helped him. On his instructions, she started up a passionate love affair with a particular engineer on the satellite project at the nearby tech company. He was flattered by her attentions, fell into her arms, and their pillow talk produced information about his sensitive work on lasers and the means to hack into his emails, text messages and voicemail. We'd planted eavesdropping equipment in her flat and at the engineer's house and knew that he was unwittingly revealing enough about the top-secret technology he was working on for the Russians to replicate it back in Moscow and advance their country's technology research and development by at least 30 years. I was in my car keeping watch at Farnborough Airport for Hungry Worm, our code name for the blonde. I had to be careful because, though it was unlikely that her Russian handler had given her any anti-surveillance training, I couldn't follow her directly out of the car park if she left the building. She was bound to be wary, given the furtive nature of what she was up to, and she might suspect something wasn't quite right even if she wasn't experienced enough to identify exactly what was wrong. Word came through on the radio. There'd been a tip that the Russian was planning a meeting with Hungry Worm, probably so she could hand over secret documents she'd managed to get her hands on from her boyfriend. But no one on our side knew where it was to be. He had apparently left the details of where and when at a florist's shop. We don't have any further intelligence, just a heads up that it's going to take place. She had obviously been told not to use her mobile phone to text him, hence we had no electronic intercepts to go on. Nor could we send an agent into the flower shop to see what the message was, just in case the florist was a Russian recruit, too. But we desperately needed to monitor that meeting, and, if possible, photograph it, if we were to gather the proof to present to the Russian embassy and kick this guy out of the country for trying to steal our technology. The problem was we had absolutely no idea where it was to be held. I watched as a white courier van pulled up outside the executive suite where the blonde worked and a woman got out with flowers and took them inside to deliver. Van and driver then left. I saw the blonde leave the building and head off to a bus stop on the main road. There she got on a nearly empty number 82 bus. We couldn't send someone to follow her on board. That would be too much of a giveaway. Cars would tail the bus, but still risked being spotted, if not by her then by Russian counter-surveillance who might have been tracking her movements. And what if she gave us the slip? We had to find out where she was going. I decided to act on my own initiative rather than await orders. Though it risked compromising the whole operation if I was spotted, I walked into the reception area of the executive suite. A fresh bunch of flowers was on the front desk. Trying to appear as if I was just waiting for someone, I strained to see the greeting card on the flowers. The message was upside down but I managed to make out the words, "My beautiful lady, meet you same time at the Crescent." I turned away, spun an impromptu yarn to a security guard who'd asked me my business and left the building. Back in my car, I phoned into base to give them the message. It was enough for the boys there to rapidly check this new information against the pair's known meeting places. The word came back. Meeting place between Dirty Boot and Hungry Worm is believed to be at the RHS, Royal Horticultural Society, Garden and Wesley, specifically the Glass House. The radio net was now buzzing as everyone swung into action and reported in. Hungry Worm is off the bus, said a message from the surveillance team covering the blonde. Apparently she was waiting by the side of the road. Then, stand by. Stand by. Dirty Boot is in a black taxi and pulling alongside her. This could be a calamity. The danger was that the Russian was onto us and had been following us as we tracked her movements. Was he now warning her off? But we need not have worried. The blonde got into the taxi with the Russian and together they sped off. The whole team was directed to get to Wisley and Surrey as fast as possible, but without being seen. With Russian targets, you need to remain in the shadows or they will rumble you. We couldn't follow the taxi directly or overtake it without the risk of blowing our cover. Getting ahead of them meant a hair-raising drive at top speed through side streets and back routes. Overtaking anything in our path at 140 miles per hour, we set off a speed camera, but things like that don't bother us. Fines, parking tickets and London congestion charges get paid by the service. And we made it. We got to Wisley ahead of the taxi and were in position with cameras to snap it when it arrived. Another of the team was already on foot inside the gardens, taking pictures of the plant life with a long lens. It was good cover. One woman in her late 40s apparently photographing flowers could get a crystal clear image of both targets. I sat in my car outside and waited. Suddenly the radio sprang to life again. Black cab heading towards Wisley entrance. Followed by Dirty Boot and Hungry Worm now out and walking arm in arm towards the main building. Nobody else went inside the gardens, which was wise. If we'd flooded the place with agents, they would have stuck out like a sore thumb. We hid ourselves around the area, using cars and buildings for cover. The controller kept us up to date with a running commentary on what was going on in the glass house. Hungry Worm has shown Dirty Boot a brown paper folder. Dirty Boot looked at the contents but did not take anything out. The folder is still with Hungry Worm. She put it into her handbag. I had to admire this. By leaving the folder with the blonde, the Russian handler technically hadn't stolen state secrets. He was making sure he and Russia kept their distance. Either this was because he'd spotted us or, more likely, that he was instinctively providing himself with an extra layer of operational security. His plan was to receive the actual documents at a later date and was merely checking them. Bloody hell, these Russians are good. And then in a flash the secret rendezvous in the gardens was over. The Russian headed towards the exit, where the taxi they'd come in was waiting in the car park. He got in and it drove off, with him staring rather suspiciously out of the back window. The order came to let it go. We were not to follow. The blonde hadn't moved and so nor did we. We stay with Hungry Worm in the folder. We can't risk a loss here. There was a lot at stake. Whatever intelligence about lasers the folder contained was clearly top priority. Losing it could be catastrophic. The United Kingdom relies heavily on being on the front foot in technologies like this. It's partly a question of money. Our research and development on weapons is among the most advanced in the world. If another country steals it, it could cost us billions of pounds in earning power. More importantly, though, we stand to lose our ability to defend ourselves. If certain codes and equipment were handed over to foreign intelligence, it could render our submarines and quick-reaction fast jets useless. Most people don't realize it, but the biggest threat to our country isn't terrorists living among us and causing the occasional atrocity. It's the smooth-talking suit like the one who drove away in a taxi. By now, the blonde was also on the move, walking to the car park where she, too, was met by a black cab. Everyone was on high alert as it drove her, and that precious file, away. It passed me and I let it move round a bend in the road before following discreetly. One of our motorbikes joined the surveillance from a side street, tucking in out of sight behind the taxi. Another team reported an alarming development. In his taxi, the Russian handler had doubled back and was now behind the blonde, presumably checking she wasn't being followed. We needed to be on top of our game here. It was vital he didn't see us, but if we gave him too much room he'd get away. And he didn't spot us, though it was a close call at times as this strange, strung-out circus of taxis, souped-up cars and motorbikes with leather-clad riders made its way along the dual carriageway and in parallel B-roads through the quiet English countryside. By now, the Russian had closed up on the blonde's taxi and together they pulled into a petrol station. The updates crackled over the radio, both taxis at the fuel pumps. Dirty Boot and Hungry Worm are walking into the shop at the garage. I knew it. This was going to be the handover of the folder. Just moments later they emerged from the shop and went towards their respective taxis. But which one now had the folder? We had to know because it was a safe bet that the two cabs would now split up and go in different directions. Who to follow if we wanted to safeguard the file? Would we have to guess? Classic spycraft came to our rescue. One of the most experienced members of our team, a 30-year veteran, had spotted the Russian shirt was hanging out at the back. It hadn't been when he went into the shop. He must have tucked the file underneath and forgotten to tidy his clothing. It was time to stop him. He could soon be photographing the paperwork in the back of the taxi or sending it directly to a secure server before destroying the evidence. But we had to make the right call. At the time, there was much tension between London and Moscow. If we got this wrong and arrested a bona fide diplomat for no good reason, it would be extremely embarrassing for Downing Street. We needed to check him out in the contents of the taxi, but do it in a way that gave us a sliver of deniability should it all go pear-shaped. So Dirty Boots' taxi was allowed to drive off while an elaborate ambush was being planned up ahead. Not long afterwards, a regular police car with its blue lights flashing pulled the taxi over on the A325, ostensibly to conduct a license check on the driver as part of a crackdown on rogue taxis. The uniformed officers, one of whom was Special Branch and in the know, had a dog with him, which could sniff out drugs. When it reacted positively, they had an excuse to impound the taxi and detain its occupants. It was a tactic designed to give the government a plausible story to spin should a war of words break out after we kicked the Russian diplomat out of the country. It didn't come to that. Instead, there was a final blast over the radio from base as the operation reached its climax. Dirty Boot is handcuffed, and one of the officers is now pulling sheets of paper from the back of his trousers. Hungry Worm and her driver have been arrested too. We got them. Done a great job and got the proof. And we could all go home now. Along with the rest of the team, I was on a high, knowing that Russia's best weren't good enough for us. And the upshot? The next morning, we were informed that Dirty Boot, the Russian spy masquerading as a diplomat, had already been escorted to the airport and told to leave the country. Hungry Worm, the blonde graduate he had turned with his promises of money and a new life in Moscow, was still in custody and more than likely wouldn't go to jail, as she was providing information on the Russian and how he contacted her. As for the poor engineer who'd been suckered into unwittingly disclosing secrets, he was left puzzling over the sudden disappearance of his newfound love. He was never actually told one of his files had been whisked from under his nose and nearly made it to Moscow. Instead, he got a warning from his boss to be more careful about his personal security in future and not let his head be turned by a pretty girl. No more honey traps, please. Tom Marcus is a former MI5 officer writing under a pseudonym. Adapted from Soldier Spy by Tom Marcus, published by Penguin Books Limited at £7.99. Copyright Tom Marcus 2016. To order a copy for £6.39. Offer valid until April 1, 2018. Visit www.mailshop.co.uk/books or call 0844 571 0640. P&P is free on orders over £15.
Where the freaks at?